Okay, thank you so much, everyone. A very warm welcome to you all, and thanks so much for joining this final seminar for the UNSW Antiracism Collective seminar series. My name is Andrew Brooks. I am a lecturer in the School of Arts and Media at UNSW.
I'm Astrid Larange. I'm a senior lecturer in the School of Art and Design, also at UNSW.
And together we have been working with a group of other staff and students at UNSW on this project, which has been called the Antiracism Collective. I will give a slightly more formal introduction to the collective as part of our introduction, but it really is just a space for us to come together to think together through questions of race and racism and how we do the work of anti-racism.
So we begin tonight by acknowledging the sovereign lands of the Wangal people of the Eora Nation. This land where we are sitting this evening, where we are hosting tonight's talk, was never ceded to the Crown and remains the site of continued care, custodianship and resistance. In acknowledging the unbroken sovereignty of country, we point to the illegitimate claim to sovereignty made by the settler nation state of Australia. And we acknowledge Wangal elders past and present who defy this illegitimacy with the continuation of culture and tradition beyond colonial capitalism. We extend this acknowledgement to First Nations people joining us today. The struggle against the violence of colonialism is also always a struggle against racial capitalism, and the struggle is won through solidarity, study and action. We therefore extend our acknowledgement to anti-colonial and anti-capitalist movements worldwide, to the counter-history that shadows the modern world and that promises a just and livable future. To acknowledge country is an opportunity to reflect on our relationship to place, but more than that, it is an opportunity to consider how we might move from reflection to action and join Indigenous struggles against colonialism worldwide.
So the Antiracism Collective is a group of students and staff, as I mentioned, in the Faculty of Art, Design and Architecture at UNSW that over the course of this year have come together with the intention of trying to better understand what race is and how it continues to function as a structure of domination. The collective aims to contribute to scholarship and research on race, racialization, racism, and of course, anti-racism. Race, as Stuart Hall famously put it, is a sliding signifier, a concept that is continually reinvented through shifting practices of ascription. Scholarship on race, on the concept of race, remains integral precisely because it is not a static concept. And so we are committed to the study of racialization and racism that is attentive to the way these concepts are shaped by economic, political, historical and cultural forces. And the work we've been trying to do includes research on settler colonialism and imperialism, race and its intersections with gender and class, race in and as technology, and crucially, anti-racist struggles, and of course, as is the subject of today's talk, abolition. From this grounding in scholarly attention to race, the collective seeks to intervene in pedagogy, institutional issues, and to facilitate outreach and exchange. And our hope is that this seminar series can add to much needed conversations on race in this place. This is our last seminar for the year, and we are so excited and thrilled to have Tabitha Lean taking us out and joining us today. The previous seminars in this series were from Tony Birch, Olufemi Otaiwo, and Maria Giannakopoulos. They were all fantastic seminars, and the recordings of those will be coming soon to the Antiracism Collective website. So if you missed those and want to catch up on them, then you're very welcome to kind of come back and have a listen.
So Tab is likely someone who needs no introduction to our audience tonight, but of course we will introduce her, and we're so incredibly pleased to have her tonight. Tabitha Lean, or as her ancestors know her, Budhin Mingaan, is a Gunditjmara woman living on Boandik country. Tabitha is a storyteller and abolition activist who argues that the criminal punishment system is a brutal and often deadly colonial frontier for her people, and uses her lived prison experience to fight for the total abolition of the prison industrial complex. Thanks so much for joining us tonight, Tabitha.
Thanks very much. Nyata wa nyatu nakliam Budhin Mingaan, nyatu Gunditjmara. Mayaba wangun yuntu wamia pumia ala mingan, Boandik miring dinwernye yana popa miring. Unyata, my name is Tabitha, or as my ancestors know me, Budhin Mingaan. By way of introduction, I descend from the Gunditjmara people. My blood carries the stories, the songs, and the wisdoms of all of my grandmothers past, and my bones will eventually return to the earth which birthed my mother, and where our warriors lay their heads in eternal rest. Thank you to Astrid and Andrew for having me present in this series of lectures. I hope you find my contribution here this evening useful. I would like to especially thank Aboriginal people who are zooming in for this event tonight. Zooming in the midst of immense grief in our community and through enduring and perpetual racism our people and community are subjected to on the daily. Attending lectures like these are additional labour on top of our survival. I appreciate your labour and presence in this space. As is proper way, I acknowledge that I stand this evening on my children's country, the land of the Boandik people. As an uninvited visitor on these lands, I offer my deep thanks to the Boandik elders for allowing me to tread on these soils, to bathe in these waters, and to enjoy these breezes. I've recently moved to the lands of the Boandik people from Ghana country, where I was born and raised, and I hope to always remember to walk the land with soft feet, an open heart, and deep respect. I also want to make the very specific point that my capacity to do this work in this place and space is leveraged of the continued dispossession of the Boandik people from their country, something that we should all be mindful of every time our feet touch the sacred soils of stolen land. I would also like to acknowledge the lands of each of you stand on today, the place you live, study and work upon, the waters, the sky, the hills, the valleys, the rivers, the lakes, the oceans, the trees, every single living entity that breathes life into this island continent they call Australia, always was, always will be Aboriginal land. I would like to specifically acknowledge my brothers, sisters and kin incarcerated in their own country. My brothers, sisters and kin sitting in cages this evening who are struggling just to survive a colony designed to erase, brutalise and kill. I also acknowledge the consistent frontline labour undertaken by Aboriginal families who have had family members killed in custody. I acknowledge those with lived prison experience who continue to show up to demand justice and to speak up with determination that no other family should endure the violence and deadly consequences of the criminal punishment system in this country. I want to preface this presentation today by saying that nothing I say here tonight will be extraordinary. I am not extraordinary. I am simply a manifestation of my ancestors' struggle for survival. It is by their grace that I do this work. Nothing that I say will not have already been said by hundreds of my people before me. I acknowledge that all of the theorising about these subjects have been spoken of by people who have gone before me. So my contribution builds on the work of my old people. I indeed stand on the shoulders of giants. Furthermore, I don't hold myself out to be an expert on these matters. However, I do have some expertise in these areas. And tonight I will speak from my own lived prison experience and from my own standpoint. That is, I am presenting my own view on these very complex matters. My presentation will incorporate stories and experiences. Storytelling is central to the way we make meaning of the world, central to our ways of knowing, being and doing. I story to prioritise the Aboriginal voice. I story to honour the ways of the old, and I story as a way of decolonising knowledges. To story is to disrupt existing hegemonies. It is a way to counter the epistemic violence perpetrated against our people for the past 233 years. Sharing stories is our medicine. When we share our stories with each other, we heal each other. Storying is a way to hold true our knowledges that have been plundered by colonialists for centuries. I accept, however, that academia demands objectivity, but I stand firm in the view that it is our subjectivity that has been and always will be our strength. For all that I talk about today is intimately mine. It is the foundation of mine and my people's existence and has become the nature of our resistance. We are indeed knowledge keepers. In sharing my story with you today, I do not offer myself up for your judgment, nor do I intend to upset anyone. I am a criminalised woman. I have been to prison. It is impossible to speak about prisons without speaking about violence. Therefore, I should warn you, my story will reference carceral violence. Too often in these types of presentations or lectures, we don't speak the whole truth and nothing but the truth. We speak half-truths for fear of upsetting people or in some kind of attempt to keep people feeling comfortable. Sometimes these conversations feel less than authentic to me. But to be radical means we must go to the root if we are to change something. We have to sit with tension and pain and discomfort. So maybe some people will walk away from this presentation this evening and think more critically. And maybe some of you will continue with the dissonance. Either way, I can only speak from a place of truth and power. But please take care of yourself, because truth can hurt, truth can be pain, and truth can be extremely uncomfortable. Okay, let's go. Basically, Ms. Lean, don't fuck any of the other prisoners. Fucking was the last thing on my mind the day I went to prison. The day they took me to prison, I wasn't meant to go. I was just going to court to have a hearing about my appeal, the appeal that the prosecutor had lodged about my sentence. My lawyer said I would be going home that night. We're just going to talk, Tabitha. Of course, I kissed my kids as I left the house that day, but I hadn't readied them for my exit from their life. I hadn't readied myself for my sudden exile from not just my life, but the world, my beautiful little world of me and my 3 kids, who were then 6, 11, and 15 years old. But as I sat in that big, cold courtroom made of stone and listened to the angry prosecutor appealing to the judges in a tongue that was foreign to me, in a place whose architecture held centuries of violence for a harsher sentence than the one already imposed upon me, all I could do was watch on hopelessly as my legal aid lawyer sat on his hands, frigid, saying absolutely nothing to help my cause, as if all of a sudden the proverbial cat had his tongue and he was daydreaming about his upcoming holiday on Hamilton Island. Yeah, he'd already checked out. He was sunning himself on the sandy white beaches, likely sipping margaritas, scanning the salty sands for his next conquest, while I was staring at the panel of white judges who were readying to decide my fate. A fate I didn't know I was defending that day. I was being fed to the big white wolf, and that fucker was hungry. I felt the 4 walls of that old colonial building rush towards me, and all of a sudden, I became really, really small, and the judges on their lofty bench loomed larger than ever. I knew what was coming. They were going to take me. They were going to disappear me into the dirty, dirty bowels of the courts and whisk me away to prison, where I would rot in a cage away from my family. As the judges narrowed their beady black eyes, their noses grew long, and they handed down their judgment through seething teeth and pursed lips, I was going to prison. All of the breath left my lungs. I was winded. I don't think there was a single pint of oxygen left in my body. The room began to spin, and this hollow echo bellowed in my brain, and my ears started to ring. I became very aware of yelling from the back of the courtroom. A biggest mob had come to support me that day. The courthouse was packed with blackfellas and other family. But in all of the commotion that had started in response to that decision, it was only my dad's voice I could hear. It was my father who had risen to his feet and was yelling at the panel of judges, "You can't do this. What about the kids?" The ringing that had been so loud in my ears only moments ago was replaced with my dad's screams for justice, for mercy, for damn sanity to prevail. My dad's voice was the last voice I heard as I was escorted down to the dungeons. It was my dad's voice that haunted me the whole ride to prison. And the last whisper of it was extinguished when Mr. Cornell grunted, "Don't fuck anyone," to me at admissions at Adelaide Women's Prison, as I sat with swollen eyes, a broken heart, and fear swelling in my belly. Prison has changed me. It's changed me on a molecular level, and it's altered me in ways I can barely describe to you. It's stolen from me, and it keeps taking from me. It takes from all of us. And maybe you don't see it, but maybe you do. And if you can't see it, why not? And if you do see it, what the fuck are you doing about it? Because right now, in this country, there are thousands of people sitting in cages rather than in our communities. You've disposed of us into teeny tiny cages where we've formed this little carceral community with only each other to keep us warm and safe. Only we're all fractured people composed of broken pieces, so we don't quite fit together well. And there's all of these gaps between us, and the wind and draft keeps blowing in, and it's cold out here. Cold and lonely and perilous. So fucking cold and lonely and so damned unsafe. But hey, sure, you think it's safer to send us to prison, safer to exile some of us to the big house because we're too dangerous to be living among you. After all, this system was designed to keep people like you safe from people like me. Do you feel safe at night? Do you sleep through the night better knowing we're locked away? Is that what makes you dream easier? Fuck, what I wouldn't give for a decent night's sleep. As kids, we're taught what is a good guy and a bad guy. The goodies are the cops and the baddies are the robbers. Bang, bang, you're dead. Even cops kill robbers with impunity in our juvenile games. And people like me, we're the ugly monsters. We're the evildoers you are taught to fear. We are the spooks beneath your bed. We are the demons, the fiends, the delinquents. We are the beasts of burden, filthy, undeserving. It's why you can kill and torture us without consequence, yeah? Yet it is us who are tormented, the bereaved, the haunted. We are plagued with ill health, both mental and physical. We are dying and we are being disappeared. We are tortured in cells and killed in watch houses. We are suffocated in cages and chased down in the streets. So I ask you, who is the dangerous force here? Who is causing the most damage, destruction, despair? Not that this is a race to the bottom, mind, but hell, we have to take stock here. The people who have done the most damage to my people will never face consequence. The people doing the most harm to my mob have never and will never see the inside of a cell. So tell me, who and what is this brand of justice you uphold serving? There's got to be a better way. There has got to be a way that paves a path of liberation for all of us. There's got to be a way that paves a path of safety for you and for me. Ms. Lean, don't fuck anyone. When Mr. Cornell told me not to fuck any of the girls, I wasn't warned it was the predation of the guards I should actually be worried about. The day I arrived at prison, I cried so much that I looked like I had two black eyes. At my induction, my name was taken from me. I can't remember the last time I heard my name spoken as a free woman. I can't remember the last time I named Tabitha Lean was not associated with criminality. On the day they took my name from me, I was issued a 6-digit number as my identification and told to memorise the number, 177057. That was my new identity. I was number 177057, property of the state of South Australia. Property of the state. I was, as my ancestors were, in 1788. Sometimes I think back to that moment in prison and think it's the point of radical departure for me. But it's likely that I was issued that number much earlier on in my experience with corrections. It felt significant, yeah. It felt big because they took my name, the name that my mother gave to me. I didn't hear my name spoken outside of a correctional facility for years after that. The moment changed me. After they took my name, they took my dignity. I was stripped bare and searched. I was showered and scrubbed, and my hair was checked for lice. I was weighed, and then I was dressed again in prison-issued grey track pants and a matching grey t-shirt. Grey, the colour of institutional bleakness that matched not only my mood, but the entire mood of the place. For the first 10 months I was inside, I sat in a pathetic misery bubble. I barely spoke to anyone. My long, limp hair hung across my face, and my empty eyes were always downcast. I spent time in a hard cell, in solitary, and rarely went out in the yard. I lost over 20 kilos because I couldn't eat for the deep sadness I felt in my heart and for the pining I was doing for my kids. I was scared. I was scared I wouldn't make it home, that I would be killed in there. I mean, that's what happens in those places. As a Black woman, I knew that. And then about 15 months in, I got angry, so fucking angry at that place. Angry at what was happening to me and at what was happening to my sisters in kin in cages next to me. I realised that this was a system killing by design. This was a system criminalising by design. This was a system operating exactly how the colony intended. This system was not broken. This system was working exactly how they wanted it to, as a set of interlocking practices, laws, and fantasies that liquidate entire life worlds, particularly the worlds of Black, gender non-conforming, and disabled people. And more ironically, this was a system enacted under the banner of safety and justice. But worse, this system was a weapon in the arsenal of the settler colonial war machine, and every bullet it fired hit its target, and its target were my people. Anger was, and always has been, a very productive emotion for me. And the day I walked out of those prison gates, I looked back, not for the sake of nostalgia, but to say silently to myself, I will be back. Not to be held captive by your bars, but to tear them down. And I will not rest until every single brick and bar is removed and every one of my people is freed from those cages. Freedom. I won't get my freedom moment for a while. Everyone says it will come, but it's a long time coming when you are living it. It's a long time coming when you feel like the system is breathing down your neck and that breath is hot and sticky. And it's a long time coming when you're watching agents of the very system that owns and controls your every move, killing your people one by one. So people like me live every day with our necks resting on the chopping block, our weary eyes glancing back up at the executioner, waiting for the axe to fall. the boots of the colonisers standing on our throat while they stare down at our flailing bodies, telling us to comply and be good little productive, well-behaved citizens, while their hands are clasped around our windpipes, squeezing every last bit of breath from our bodies. And we're left just trying to inhale and exhale through the day. And trust me, this isn't living. Hell, it's barely surviving. But let's get back to fucking, because that's an infinitely more fun topic. But the fucking I want to talk about is not the fucking Mr. Cornell talked about. The fucking I want to talk about is how we fuck up this system. How do we dismantle the master's house? Because I want to tear the whole damn thing down. I want to annihilate the entire colonial capitalist carceral state and all the systems of violence that enable it. Total annihilation. Does that scare you? Because maybe they're right. Maybe I am the spook that lays in wait beneath children's beds. Only the children are state agents and the bed is the carceral machine. So yeah, I am laying in wait. But yeah, total annihilation. But frankly, this plan shouldn't scare you because it's not negative, nor is it focused solely on obliteration, although I admit that's kind of the fun part. What I am proposing is a creative process where we can sit together and imagine another world. I'm opening a portal of possibility, a space for us to dream collectively. And like the little white rabbit beckoning Alice to follow him down a rabbit hole, I'm asking you to take that step into the dreaming space with me. But in doing so, you need to know that like Alice, you're going to see some things that make your head spin, some things that puzzle you, and some things that make you outright uncomfortable. Because for many of you, you're going to have to confront the reality that you are entirely complicit in the atrocities committed against people by the state. And many of you are beneficiaries of it also. Harsh, but true. And until many of you reckon with that truth, we can't fuck with this system. In fact, I think this is one of the main reasons we haven't been able to dismantle the house. It's not just that we've been using the master's tools, it's that you haven't realised that you are actually the masters. Let's explore that a little, because this is the part of my talk where I'm likely to offend people if I haven't already. Because I'm sure many of you are saying, I'm nobody's master. I'm working every day with criminalised people, their families, or kids at risk, or people who've just been released from prison, or students. I do good work. And I bet you go home each night and feel good about it. And I guess on some level you should, yeah? Someone has to do the work. But while you were doing this work and not simultaneously working to make your job obsolete and your service unnecessary, you are actively upholding and perpetuating the system. You are an agent of the state. Fact. Now, state agents come in many forms. There are the obvious agents like cops, prison officers, Home D staff, parole officers, welfare staff, child protection officers. Then there are the lawyers, social workers, teachers, nurses, doctors, psychiatrists, youth workers, housing officers, and university lecturers. These professions all contribute to the prison industrial complex because every one of these professions can be found somewhere in the carceral system, somewhere along the pipeline. And they all contribute in some way to bolstering and enabling the carceral system. This might be in obvious ways, like containing or detaining us within the system, like literally placing cuffs on our wrists, turning the key, signing our detention slips, authorising our arrest, issuing warrants, detaining us under the Mental Health Care Act, taking our children from us under the guise of protection, or even forcibly medicating us. But then there are the more subtle but no less harmful ways, like policy development, educating future cops, or lending your academic science to justify or sharpen the will of the carceral state. All of these industries employ policing, surveillance, imprisonment, and punishment as a means of controlling the populations they serve. And all of these professions further the colonial project by feeding on and maintaining oppression and inequality through the machinations of power, punishment, violence, and control. In whatever way, shape, or form, each of you who work in these industries have a role to play in the carceral game that is played in this colony, a cruel game that exists to uphold white supremacy. If you are selling your labour to any profession that feeds the prison industrial complex, you are complicit. If you are not actively engaged in resistance against the state, you are actively complicit in state-sanctioned and state-sponsored harm. There is no separation between capitalism, the prison industrial complex, and the violence present in carceral settings. If you work in any of these spaces, you are likely witness to abuses of human rights on a daily basis. Instead of making the difference you thought you were going to make, I imagine you are coerced into silence and therefore into a role of social control. As an abolitionist, what I am proposing is that you must radically rethink the place and purpose of your role as state actors. Because right now, your role is contributing to the violent response by the state to structural social problems. And this violent response is being experienced by people like myself as politically perpetrated misery and oppression. And you have choices in all of this. You have a choice to remain slave to the machine, slave to the death squads that disappear my people, slave to those that seek to harm us, or you can join us in fucking shit up. You can join us in working to abolish the prison industrial complex. Because safety, real safety for you and for me, cannot come without freedom and justice, because who we are and what we are comes from the alchemy of our struggles. If we dismantle the systems that cage and punish, we can explicitly fight genocide and dispossession and create a world focused on radical reciprocity and accountability. Because abolition is a necessary element of the decolonial struggle, because it is anti-racist, it is pro-cooperation, it is anti-capitalist, it is intersectional, it is inclusive, anti-sexist, anti-homophobic, anti-transphobic, feminist, internationalist, environmental, and pro-cooperation. Abolition is necessary if my people are going to survive. So let's talk Turkey. Because you're probably thinking, I work 9 to 5, or in this current climate, 8 to 6. The service I work for is barely funded. I like my co-workers, the work we do is valuable, there's a place for it. We need schools, we need clinics, we need psychs, we need services. And you want me to do my job and dismantle the whole fucking world too? Yeah, I do. And there are actually people doing it right now. So let me give you 3 examples of people I see doing the work, doing the 2-pronged work of working in the colony while actively dismantling the house. Because I want you to know that it's possible. I want you to have people to look towards. I want there to be lighthouses. First is my sister, Dr. Chelsea Watego. Chelsea works tirelessly theorising about race and racism in the colony. She's a prolific writer and public intellectual, and in my opinion, one of the greatest minds of this country. Some of the most brilliant pieces of political commentary I have read in this place have been written by her. Her work has shaped my thinking and my academic work. Her first book, a fierce manifesto titled Another Day in the Colony, was met with critical acclaim and the love of Black followers all around. In fact, I joke that if Buffalo is open. Chelsea is now leading an interdisciplinary team of scholars committed to the survival of Indigenous people locally and globally, foregrounding Indigenous intellectual sovereignty. She's an academic and author, but critically, and most importantly, Chelsea is using her academic brilliance to wage a war on race. She is actively dismantling the house, often at a great cost to her, both personally and professionally. But man, she does the work. She does the work for herself, her kids, her family, and her community. She does the work that will pave a liberatory pathway for her mob. She doesn't just sit in an office theorising, she acts. She takes her knowledge and science to the streets and uses it to tear at the fabric of the colony's cloth. And this is abolition in action. Secondly is Sister Amy Maguire. Amy is a freelance writer and journalist. She's been the editor of a number of things and she's got podcasts. But Amy works quietly and respectfully to expose ugly truths. She peels back colonial masks and shows us all what lays beneath. Amy's work in her publication Presence is some of the most brilliantly and generously articulated commentary available to people for free. Amy uses her words to dismantle the house. She uses her words and builds towers of power for her people with them. She gives us life with words where life has been stolen. And with those life-giving words, she builds evidence that mob can take and use to dismantle the master's house. The next example is my sister, Debbie Kilroy. Debbie is a lawyer and CEO of Sisters Inside. Busy work, right? She's in and out of courts and jails, supporting and defending clients, a big enough job on its own. But she doesn't just stop there. She is actively working to make her job and her industry extinct. She is the architect of the Free Her campaign, the Stop Toxic Prison campaign, and campaigns across the country for the total abolition of cages and prisons. Add to that, she makes herself personally available to women and girls who are or have been in prison and responds to our needs. I have been and continue to be the beneficiary of her generous support. And this is an example of someone working in a system, but working to tear it down. And I want to give you two more quick examples. The very host of these series, Astrid and Andrew. Astrid and Andrew are two people I've never trusted more with my words. They have always respected my work in ways that others haven't. But that's not the point I want to make. My point is, not only do Andrew and Astrid work silently, quietly, and humbly as brilliant academics and university researchers, but they also work quietly, staunchly, and diligently to dismantle the house with their beautifully powerful and impactful publication, Rosa Press. So you see, it is possible. You can be within and fuck it up at the same time. You must, because what's the alternative? You stay on as masters of the house that tortures, cages, and kills. Because now that you know, you've got to do something about it, or stay silently and painfully complicit. And we all carry on as normal. I go back to my tortured life with my neck still on the chopping block, kids still in cages, pining for their mamas, dads in prison, never hugging their kids, mums crying for babies torn from their breasts, old ladies living their last days in prisons, girls as young as 10 being strip searched. I mean, is this a world you want to inhabit? Or you join us and you say, not in my name. No, you stand up and you say it, not in my fucking name. Because abolition is not just about closing the doors to violent institutions. You also get to build up and recover institutions and practices and relationships that nurture wholeness, self-determination, and transformation. Abolition is not some distant future, but something we create in every moment when we say no to the traps of colonialism and yes to the nourishing possibilities dreamed of and practiced by our ancestors. Joining us on the abolition journey lets us start dialogues of curiosity, to enter rooms of possibility, to imagine ways to centre community, to a focus on abundance and healing, not scarcity and harm, to imagine transformative approaches which prioritise health, well-being and safety. We literally have an opportunity to build a world focused on radical reciprocity and accountability, not retribution and revenge. You get to make yourself an instrument of abolition. The dismantling of all of these systems of oppression begins with us personally. Liberation will not come from the system or the state. it will come from us. We often look everywhere else for the answers other than in ourselves. And that's as much white supremacy as the system itself. The journey to embody non-punitive impulses is work, and abolition calls upon us to do the work. It's difficult work, but critical work. We must challenge ourselves, especially if we understand that so much of what we know and so much of what we do and how we respond has been shaped by white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. And look, we may not all fall on the same page of the book at the same time about what abolition looks like or what it will look like, and that's cool. Because as Ruth Wilson Gilmore says, it's important to spar and to work out our differences, because not everyone in the room, and certainly not everyone in the abolitionist movement, is on the same page. And there's no need for us to pretend otherwise. There is real strength in difference. That's not to say that we're going to entertain some watered down version of abolition where reform creeps in as compromise. But abolition is a verb, right? We're doers. We're going to do the two-pronged work, tearing down and dismantling and disestablishing all of the systems that suck the very life from our Black souls, while building up new systems which will breathe the breath of life back into community and care. So, what do you say? Want to get together and tear down the house? Don't fuck anyone, Ms. Lean. I didn't willingly fuck anyone in prison. I was fucked. I was fucked over. And the prison system continues to fuck me on the daily. I don't sleep at night. I still remember, and my body holds the score. My mind doesn't know how to forget, and my body can't forgive. There are scars so deep in my soul that I'm not sure I will ever be the same again. My good friend Tina told me this fact one day. She'd read it somewhere that the body completely regenerates its cells every 7 years. We're not sure if it's true, but I like to think one day that I will have a body that hasn't been touched by a man or a system without my consent. One day I will be whole again, or at least one day I will be a me that has had full control over the body that she carries. One day I will be free and be freedom embodied. One day we'll all be free, maybe. So before we start the Q&A bit, I want to thank Andrew and Astrid for having me here today and make a comment about why it's important to centre the voices of those with lived prison experience. I think that the abolition movement, a movement centred on love, healing and care, must centre the voices and experiences and leadership of those with lived prison experience. Only in abolition practice can those of us who've been cast out by society as disposable people find a place to express our personal positionality truly and safely, and to be heard free from encumbrances and academic writing conventions. Abolition gives us all a framework for amplifying knowledges outside of the mainstream academic discourse. And this is central to allyship against racism, transmisogyny, homophobia, misogyny, ableism, classism, and xenophobia. I think that for people like myself who have been criminalised, just our presence in some spaces is seen as unsettling as it disrupts the hegemony. So it's important for those around us, those who organise panels or invite people like us to come in and share from our lived experience and expertise, to understand how the burden of care and the labour of harm reduction are appropriated. It's important to challenge practices and discourses that place the burden of change onto marginalised people and communities. And it is for you, as professionals and practitioners of all forms, and as people with privilege, to relieve the burden from those who are marginalised, to expose the harms, violence, and trauma produced under the imperialist, white supremacist, capitalist patriarchy, and to deal with the aftermath. And as an abolitionist, I would encourage you to do this through a focus on care, kindness, nurture, and pleasure, and to work towards the reduction of personal and systemic harm collectively, without resorting to shame, guilt, and punishment central to the functioning of the prison. So when you wake up tomorrow morning ready to fuck things up, look yourself in the mirror Reflect on your personal behaviours and actions, and consider how they may reinforce and uphold harmful and toxic structures, and ask yourself, how am I going to exist today in a manner that will actively oppose the white supremacist superstructure and fight for all humanity? Because that, my people, is how we're going to fuck things up. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Tabitha, for your beautiful, staunch, wise, brilliant and stirring call to action. We're so grateful for you as ever. And it's such an amazing treat to hear you speak and to hear you address our audience tonight. So as you know, Andrew and I prepared a few questions to ask, partly to just respond directly to your text, but also to give the audience a little bit of time to formulate a question. So if you have a question, as Andrew said, pop it in the chat or put your hand up and we will come to audience questions shortly. That goes to all of you watching on the live stream as well. There's a comment stream on YouTube, so you can pop a comment on a question in there and we'll be monitoring that chat. But to kick it off, I'll ask one question and Andrew will ask another. And Tab, just so you know, we're just going to go to the second and third question, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. So you spoke in your talk about the productiveness of anger and the centrality of anger in your journey toward abolition. People often speak about abolition in terms of building structures of love and care and support that sustain life instead of coercively controlling and extinguishing it, including you in this very talk. So we'd like to hear you to speak a little bit about the role of anger in abolition, as well as the relationship between anger and love as necessary and non-contradictory elements of abolitionism.
Yeah, thanks. It's a really good question. I think anger is beautiful. We pathologize anger into something to fear. But what if anger is a source of life, a manifestation of creativity? What if we can use our anger to connect with others? Because for me, anger is the beginning of growth. Anger can fill up an entire space. Anger can explode out of nowhere. Anger can come slowly like a dark cloud taking over. Like anger seems to emanate from a source deep in your soul. The force or pressure of it exerts, bursts the bounds of your heart. And sometimes anger emerges from silence, so silent that you can hear a candle flicker, right? And that's when it's most beautiful, I find. And that's when it's most powerful for me. Anger, when it's most thought out and considered, is when it can move mountains. And I don't see anger as the opposite of love. I see it as essential to love. I only get angry about things I care about. So it's essential. That is, I use anger as a transformative energy. I use anger to connect. So anger then is like a life energy. So I use anger as in a service to preserving love, to connect at a deeper level. So that's how we can grow. And besides, I also reject that binary of good, bad emotions, because all emotions are necessary. And while there are needs unmet in our society, we should all be angry. And I would ask, if people are not angry, why the fuck aren't they? I mean, look around people. My mob are being killed. I mean, kids are walking home from school and being killed on the streets. I mean, why the fuck aren't people angry? And yeah, so for me, anger is necessary. Anger is important. And yeah, as I said, I think anger is beautiful. And I don't know why we've come to think anger is bad, but yeah, we have. Don't know if that answered it, but so just a bit of a waffle, sorry.
That answered it so wonderfully. Thank you so much. I think it's such an important point. And we're talking about struggles to dismantle something that is extremely entrenched, and so that's always going to be, and that's going to come through a simple goodwill, but it's going to be a kind of unsettling and maybe even violent process, and so there's something to be said about the kind of like depth of that, or channeling these different feelings.
And beware the calls for civility, right? Like, you know, that call to be polite is always the call to back down and don't show emotion, and I think we should just be raw and real, because when we shy away from how we really feel, it means we don't ever get anywhere. So yeah.
So in your talk, then you spoke also a little bit about the sort of elusiveness of freedom, a statement that we took to have a kind of double meaning here, referring both to the sort of ongoing struggles against the settler state and the violence of colonialism, and in relation to the sort of long tentacles or the long reach of the prison system, which is obviously not disconnected from colonialism either. So we were interested if you might speak a little bit more about the way that the carceral complex follows people post-release from prison, and if you can speak a bit to the kind of extended temporality of imprisonment and punishment that you sort of gestured to a little bit in this talk tonight.
Yeah, I think for me, freedom's elusive in many ways. I mean, I will be tethered to the state for more than a year, I guess, while I complete parole, and then for a little bit longer while some administrative things play out. But also, I think my arrest changed my dialogical relationship with the state, and I guess as an Aboriginal woman, that was always inevitable. But as blackfellas, we're never free. So I think there's two components to that question. As blackfellas, we're not free from the state because we are over-policed and criminalised for our very existence, and there's numbers of ways that happens. The way we are monitored and controlled. I mean, I'll give you an example. My son was part of an Aboriginal basketball academy that's run here in South Australia. It's a state Aboriginal basketball program that's run by the Education Department, sponsored by the police. So in good faith, I send my son to an Education Department thing that he tried out. It was highly competitive to get into this elite sporting academy. So you'd rock up to do this education program where they complete a number of TAFE certificates alongside their learning and this elite sport academy to play with undercover police officers. Now, as parents, we don't know this, but this is a way that our kids are being surveilled. You know, like my kid's pretty savvy. So, you know, he spoke to them about not wanting to be this, and his view is that they're putting kids, this is how they're getting kids on suspect target management lists. Likely true. But this is an example of how blackfellas are surveilled in the carceral state. This stuff is never ends for blackfellas. But then there's this idea of freedom post-release, is that you are never free from your sentence. There's this saying of, do the crime, do your time. What is it? Do the crime, do your time. God, I can't even remember the saying because it's so ridiculous because it's not even true. So that there is no end to it. I mean, once you get out of prison, you're not able to get, it's so hard to get a job because you've got a criminal record. So you can't get a working with children check. So you can't ever work in a school. You can't even get a job as a cleaner because you can't get a police check to get, to go get a job as a cleaner. You can't, even when I apply to I sometimes guest lecture at universities, I can't get through their electronic forms because I don't have a police clearance. So I can't even, if I do their electronic forms, I can't even get through page 3 or something because I can't get a police clearance. You can't get insurance because you have a criminal record. So you're just wiped out of ever getting car insurance. So there's all these people with criminal records driving around with no car insurance because insurance companies won't cover us. You can't get contents insurance. All these collateral consequences that make us fully in society, but we can't actually participate fully in society because we're locked out of labour markets, we're locked out of housing markets, we're locked out of a range of different things. So employment, housing, even getting a rental is really hard. Like, so women who get released from prison onto home detention, try and get a house when you're on home detention and you've got to apply to a real estate agent. We know how hard it is to get a rental right now for anyone, let alone a person on home detention, where corrections, you can't accept a house until corrections have gone through that property to approve it. Can you imagine going to your real estate agent and saying, oh, corrections have just got to come and have a bit of a look at it first before I can put it through? No real estate agent's going to rent to you. So there's this, you're just never free. You're constantly under the watch. I am on parole now, and I have monthly meetings with my parole officers. They surveil my Twitter feed, so I'm regularly asked to take down tweets. They might even be Zooming in today, so hello if you are. So what I lecture on at universities is surveilled and has to be approved of, like the content that I lecture on. Everything that we do is surveilled while we're out here, so we're just semi-citizens. And I don't think people realise that. I think people think we're out here as fully functioning members of society, but we're actually not. We're like toddlers, where everything we do is we have to ask permission to do. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. I always feel like when people ask me questions, I go off on a tangent, but yeah, this elusiveness, and the freedom moment never comes. It's like, I'm due to get off parole next year, and everyone says, oh, it's not long now, Tabs. But when you're sitting in it, it's like it's ages away. And it's because I think I have 50 conditions. I have 50 parole conditions that I have to comply with. Like, that's huge, right? To remember 50 parole conditions. I mean, it makes me sick to say this, but I'm fairly compliant. How sick does that make you? Just like, ugh, that makes me want to vomit to say, but I'm compliant. I'm compliant because I don't want to go back to prison. I'm compliant because I have kids that I have to be compliant for, and compliant because I don't want to be killed in the prison system. But that makes me want to vomit to say I'm compliant. Debbie Kilroy's on here, and she's like going to text me and say, ugh, you're gross. But it's true. I'm compliant, but I'm compliant with more than 50 conditions. But as a criminalised person, you have to remember 50 conditions that you've got to comply by. This is why people end up back in prison, not because we're innately criminal, or not because we're naughty, or because we want to go back to prison. It's because this system is constructed in such a way that you're set up to fail. I mean, you half the time don't know what you're allowed to do or not allowed to do. Yeah, and so, yeah, there's no freedom. Freedom is elusive. And yeah, the idea of the tentacles of the prison system is that they're everywhere. Everyone's watching you, and there's nothing that you can say. So I've recently, my daughter's been having some health issues, and that's put us in contact with several sections of the health system. And that's been an interesting thing for me, because I haven't agreed with some of the care that's been suggested in the health system. And one of the psychologists said to me, you should be really careful, because if you don't comply with the health suggestions, given that you're on parole, like you'll come under the, you come under the watch of the state. That's been another really interesting thing about freedom for me, is not being able to make choices about the healthcare of my daughter. Because there's this kind of idea of like, well, child protection then get involved, and they're like, well, and I'm not making choices that I think are bad for her health. I'm making choices that as a mother I feel protect her. But this idea that you are a semi-citizen and that child protection are involved because you are all of a sudden a criminalised mother that, has less rights to make decisions on behalf of your child, because we are seen as I said in my talk, we are delinquents. We are people who can't be trusted to make good decisions. So yeah, once they find that out, and it was an interesting thing. I was in Mabel and I were in this appointment with the paediatrician, and everything was going well. The paediatrician was really engaged with me, and we were sort of working out a care plan. And then she got to the part in the report where it talked about I'd been to prison, because obviously, they give background of the family, and instantly she didn't want to engage with me. In fact, to the point that this paediatrician said to me, Tabitha, would you be able to go out and have this report photocopied. She sent me on a photocopying errand. This is in the hospital, so I had to leave for 20 minutes to go and photocopy a report. So you get even disregarded by other. This is what I was talking about, the tentacles of the prison industrial complex, and where everyone is complicit, even paediatricians and other arms, because they see you. As soon as they find out you are criminalised, you become disposable, even to them as a parent, because you are no longer reliable. So the disposability of criminalised people exists not just in the prison system, but in the healthcare system, in the education system, everywhere. And we have to fight as criminalised parents for the right to parent our children, not only to get the care back of our children, but to continue to care for them in the education system and in the health system. So freedom is such an elusive thing in terms of our physical freedom from prison, but also our freedom to participate fully in society. Yeah.
Thanks so much. That's such a detailed answer, and I think really speaks to these kind of collateral consequences and the kind of absolute imbrication that formerly incarcerated people find themselves in this system is kind of following them everywhere. The administrative burden as well. I think that's a really interesting aspect of this. There's it was interesting to hear you speak there about the kind of 50 conditions and this fairly extreme administrative scaffolding that's around post-release that really kind of becomes another way to constrain people.
We'd like to invite any of the participants on the Zoom call or watching via live stream to ask Tab a question. If you have a question, please pop your hand up.
We have a question from Kristen, so please jump in.
Hi, folks, and thank you, Tabitha, always. Can people hear me? Oh, wait, can people hear me okay? Thank you for your generosity and your labour and your anger. It's always, I'm always incredibly grateful to learn so much from you. And you referred at the beginning, you kind of said, I'm not an expert, but I have expertise. And I guess that sparked a lot of questions for me, but I think you've demonstrated all that expertise and lots of people here would regard you as an expert. And my question is, it's a little bit confused, I'm sorry, but I think you'll get what I mean. Sometimes when you do the kind of work that you're doing right now, educating people who don't understand, you might get fetishized or be treated as exceptional. And I think, we obviously you can't do all this labor on your own. There has to be a lot of opportunity given and space given to many, many criminalised folks across the continent, and also in lots of different types of spaces, not just dedicated conversations about abolition, obviously. And I'm wondering if you have got thoughts on how we can create spaces that people who are feeling they have no freedom and feeling monitored may feel more confident to participate in, because you can't, we don't want to go and recruit people and say, you've got to come and do this work for us. It's a really complicated one, and I don't know if there's a good answer, but I just thought I'd throw that out there and see if you've got thoughts.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Kristen. So Debbie has been working to pull together a national network of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated women and girls. So some of that work is being done and will be done to gather the voices of people across the country, and how do we pull together stories and a collection of stories and experiences of people, because you're right, not everyone wants to speak up and not everyone will feel comfortable and not everyone is safe. So each time I speak out and speak up and share my experiences, I feel like I'm putting myself at risk, putting myself and my liberty at risk. I do that in a calculated way, but it still feels like a risk, and not everyone is in a position to do that. And I that's a sensible thing for everyone to do. So we do have plans I know Deb's got a plan to do sort of a bit of a roadshow around the country to gather up stories and experiences so that we can amplify the voices and experiences of people that we can share that, because there's stories out there that need to be told. And I think there's also this thing about prisons, the genius thing that the carceral state has done is put prisons, kept them at arm's length, right? So they're behind walls. So that makes it really comfortable for you all because you don't have to see it. So it's behind bars, it's behind the walls. You don't have to see what's going on. So people like to pretend they don't know what's going on and they don't want to know what's going on. I remember, like, at Count, I have these distinct memories of like 7:30 Count, like they call it muster. We all got to line up out the front of your cell. And this was when I was in the living skills unit, which is this weird little place at Adelaide Women's Prison. It kind of looks like a caravan park. It's really weird. Anyway, you'd all line up out the front of the cells and the officers would come around and count you. And from where you could stand over the razor wire, you can actually see the houses that surround the prison. And I used to look over the razor wire and look at these houses and think, fuck, do all these people just sitting in their houses? Because some would stand out on their driveways and look at us. It was really weird. And I think, do they ever stand on their driveways and think, what goes on in there? And so I wonder, like, do all of you sit in your houses and think what goes on in prison? Probably not, because we're forgotten. Like, we're just forgotten people disposed of in prisons. So I want those stories. I want those stories in your face. But I'm also mindful of not wanting people to bleed for the colony, and I talk about that a lot. I think, Kristen, you and I have had that conversation as well, of not wanting people to have to bleed for the colony. Like, I'm really mindful that I will share certain things, but there's some spaces and places and stories that I won't share, because I'm also, I don't want to have to trot out my story just to make everyone feel sad and pity us. And I also don't want to beg for humanity either. Like, so there's this other thing that happens where we're expected to tell you how shit prison was, and also you want to hear a come good story. So everyone wants to hear that I've done something really good with my life now. So it was really horrible in prison. I was raped, this happened, that happened, but I've come out and I've made something of my life now, because everyone wants to hear that, right? No one wants to hear that I came out and I don't even know what could be bad, but something terrible has been going on and I haven't done anything with my life now. So yeah, it's weird. But yeah, you're right. So those things will happen as a national network. We'll do those things. But I know, like Deb and I've had some conversations about how do we then treat those stories. So one, they're not trauma porn for people. Two, that we're not exploiting people's stories. And but also three, how do we then get you all to act? Because, yeah, I mean, ultimately we want it. This is your system. This is your system to pull apart. So we need you to act. And frankly, there's enough data out there to tell you all how shit it is. And no one's acting right now. I mean, there's some pockets of action, but there's not a lot of action, because really people should be on the streets. I mean, Cassius Turvey was murdered on the streets. And we're not seeing mass rallies, but we had a child lynched on the streets. I mean, what more do we need to do? We had a child lynched. So as a national network, we could do a talking tour and gather up stories of women brutalised behind bars, women having babies torn from their breasts or their wombs in prison. And that might encourage people to act. But it could just also be another freaking report that sits on the cupboard, like, the Royal Commission into Aboriginal Deaths in Custody. Yet we had a 15-year-old lynched on the streets and it still didn't encourage people to act. So I don't know. Yeah, short answer, sorry. Long story short is I don't know. There is plans to do it, but will it incite people to act? I don't know. That's, I guess, the big issue. And abolition is about action, and I don't know how to get people to act. I don't know what it takes. Like, what does it take for us to revolt, right? When does the revolution happen? Andrew and Astrid, do you have that scheduled in yet?
If only.
Does anyone have another question? Tess, I know that you have put a couple of comments in the chat. I'm not 100% sure if it's a question, but Tess, if you would you like to unmute and speak to your comments and to your experience and to your calls for action and for conversations?
Hi, yes, I can. I'm actually cooking dinner right now. So I've been cooking and listening in to such a powerful lecture. So much respect for Tabitha. So I wasn't going to miss it for anything. So that's why I'm cooking dinner. And I put a question in the chat, and it's one I've been thinking about lots lately. I'm a First Nations person. My father was heavily criminalised when I was a child, and then as a youth, I was in the juvenile justice system as well. But I've really been thinking lots lately, more so, about the impact on children. And Tabitha, you talked about that at the start of your lecture, saying, you looked at your children in the courtroom and knew that, you were going to be locked up and taken away from them. And I've just been wondering lately, how can we capture more of those voices? Like there are adult children like myself that can speak to that experience. We don't have to be speaking directly to children and re-traumatising them, but how do we get more of a platform about that impact as well, because it's like we don't get to tell those stories. I agree with you. There's a couple of organisations doing some work with kids whose parents have been in prison. There's a group in South Australia, but Boandik, not too keen. But there is Shine for Kids in Queensland doing some work around kids with criminalised parents, and they're seeking to amplify the voices of that population group, and because it is often they're referred to as sort of like the forgotten group of kids. And I'm currently editing a magazine, Archer Mag, doing an incarceration edition, and we've got 2 excellent articles going into that. It's going to be written by 2 young people speaking to their experiences as young people of criminalised parents. One person, Jax, who is an incredible young person, writing about their experience of having a criminalised father and what that meant for them. I'm super excited for that article to come out. And then another article of another awesome young person writing about their experiences of both their parents going to prison. So there's going to be some stories coming out soon, and I think it is important that we get the voices of young people. And I'm hoping maybe the National Network talking to them might pick up some of those voices as well, because I think you're right, Tess, that those voices are important, because a lot of those kids are involved in the system themselves, and and like so much shame at growing up, and it's like a hidden story for children. And thank you. Thinking about one of the articles, and the young person talking about going into the prison every fortnight and interacting with the officers and listening to the officers just joke about their parents being in prison, and the violence that they then witnessed, their parent, so that violence from the officers. And then, these are the kids that are going to become the next wave of abolitionists. These are the kids that I want to nurture and support and grow. So there is also some really cool work being done by some Black organisations as well in encouraging and supporting young Black activists around abolition. So there was recently an abolition camp on Gunditjmara country. So that's very cool. So there's some good work being done as well. So that was with criminalised young people, or young people who had experiences of criminalisation in some form. So there is some work happening around the place. I think that there could be more work happening, but I think there is an emerging awareness that young people being affected. But rad. Nice to see you. Wonderful. Thank you. I'll keep an eye out and go on a bit of a dive. Thanks, Tabitha. Thanks so much.
Thanks so much, Tess, and thanks, Tab. There's a question, or Jace has a hand up. Please jump in.
Sorry, my computer just won't let me turn on my video. There we go. Hi, my name's Jace. I'm on Kaurna country today. I'd love to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I stand on, and like to acknowledge the shoulders of my mob, the Wujabulak people, whose shoulders I stand here today. I wanted to thank you, Tabitha. Your work's incredible. Love the work that you do. Also love your earrings, which arrived in the mail today, just in time for the talk. Love my Revolution wear stuff. It's very good. And I wanted to say that the focus that you brought to the deep ties between child protective services, psychiatry, and the prison industrial complex is so important. And I'm glad that you made focus on it, because often when people think about prison abolition, they only think about cops and they think about jails. That's all that they care about, and they don't look at the deeper roots. Personally, I saw my younger sister have trouble with child protection, and then that led to her later incarceration and things like, we see that happen and people are ignoring it. And particularly the abolition of child protective services and psychiatry, people that speak out against it are often at a really great risk. They're systems that will hospitalize them, that will take their kids away, that'll make things so much harder. How do people that are directly affected by that keep themselves safe if they do want to speak out against it? What kind of advice would you have in those spaces? Yeah,
it's a super good question and really important question, because they are so harmful, those systems. Scary systems. They're just as scary as the prison system, because they are just as punitive, just as dangerous, and just as life-threatening. I mean, you get locked in a psych, I've been locked in a psych ward maybe 20 times. So they're just as scary. For me, and this is an advice that is relevant for everyone, for me, safety has come from being highly visible. And it's funny because my family hasn't agreed with this strategy, but for me, that I have felt safest being visible, because I felt like they couldn't disappear me as easily if I was visible. Now, like I said, my husband doesn't agree with this strategy. My kids haven't agreed with this strategy. My dad definitely doesn't agree with this strategy. He's like, oh my God, for God's sake, just wait till you're off parole and just shut up. But I just felt like if I was quiet, they could disappear me back into the prison system so much easier. But if I'm loud and I'm always speaking, and I'm always speaking up and speaking out, they just can't take it so easily. People will notice I'm gone. I can, there's people's, like my husband has people's phone numbers to ring if they take me, because I am always at risk of that. I go into my parole meeting and they've got printouts of my Twitter feed. They've got printouts of this. They've always got something to hit me up with. But yeah, I think if people want to challenge things, you have to be smart about it. You have to go in with witnesses, and you have to have it well thought out. These systems are dangerous. They will go you and they will take you and they will disappear you, and they do. So you have to think through everything. You've got to think about the consequences, and you have to be sure of what you want to do. You have to think long arm. I constantly think, what do I want to achieve by doing this? And there are things, Jace, there are things sometimes that I'll go, it's not worth it, Tabs. Like sometimes I'll go, like, so there was recently I went to a parole meeting and they had printouts of my Twitter feed, and they were like, we don't want you saying this. And I'm like, is what I'm saying untrue? And they're like, no, it's not untrue. I was like, well, did that happen? And they're like, yeah. I'm like, well, and they're like, yeah, but you just can't be saying that. And I'm like, well, it's truth. And then I just decided, you know what, Tabs, just take it down. It's not worth it right now, because, it's not worth it, because at the moment you can't be going back to jail at the moment. You've got stuff going on with the kid. Just take it down. So there's also times about picking your battles, going, what do you want out of this? Because the reality is they have power, and they have absolute power. And there's nothing you can do, right? Child protection, parole, all of those bodies, they are constructed legally in such a way that they're almost untouchable, particularly parole in South Australia. The way that the parole board is constructed is it's almost untouchable. But even in child protection, like you said, these are all child protection, psychiatrists, they are all pipelines into prison. You're involved with the child protection system. I mean, the women that are in prison all have been involved with psychiatrists and child protection. We've all been involved with all of them. And if you're not, you then get involved with them once you're in there. It's just inevitable. But yeah, I don't know if that's good advice, but it's, for me, be visible, or at least have people know what you're doing when you do it, and think about think through the consequences really carefully. So maybe talk it through with people and then decide if you can live with those consequences. So for me, it's, can I live with being silent? If I can live with it, then I'd be silent. But if I can't live with it, then I'd be bloody vocal. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's great.
No
and
worries.
Really excited to hear about the work you guys are going to do. I love Debbie's work as well. So when you guys come
but
to
Jace,
Adelaide,
I'd love to connect as well, because I want to yarn to you at some stage. Can maybe flick me your email. I think I've got your email actually. I might flick you an email after. Yeah.
I follow you on Twitter as well, so feel free to.
Deadly. Well, I'll try and connect with you. Oh, can you flick me a message? Yeah.
I will. No worries. Thank you.
Love this. Love the connections that are happening in real time. And also thank you so much, Jace, for that incredible question, such an important question, and Tab, for your response.
And we also want to give a shout out to Deb. Everyone's shouting out Deb. We want to give a shout out to Deb as well, like you did, Jace. Thank you.
We probably have time for one final question, and there is one more hand up. So Elena, if you would like to jump in and ask a question, please do.
Hello, sorry, for some reason I can't turn on my camera. I just wanted to ask a question around the ways being disabled experiences your affects, or, you know, correct what the experience is being disabled interacting with the criminal justice system, which is a really broad one, but I wanted to leave it open for what you wanted to focus on.
Yeah, and hello, thanks for tuning in, sis. Yeah, good question. I mean, as you know, the stats, sis, that like so many people who are incarcerated, who are criminalised, are disabled, and the way that disabled people are treated within the system is terrible. When I went into prison, I went in with a serious psychiatric illness. It was what led to my so-called offending. And when I went in, my psychiatrist, because I was on such heavy psych meds, he actually faxed over to the prison a list of my medication, because it was quite unsafe for me to come off them quickly. It would make me very unwell. And he faxed over there. They had a list of it. It took the prison 3 months to get me my medication. So this is how they treat people with a mental disability. I was put in a hard cell in solitary on my own. So a hard cell is a concrete 3x3. You wear a canvas smock, so no clothes. So a canvas smock is a white, thick, heavy smock made of canvas where you have no underwear on. And you sleep on a mattress on the floor, and the mattress is like this thin. And all you have in your cell is a toilet, and there's no, it's just bars, so there's no privacy. So you sleep with your head right by the toilet bowl. So you can imagine what that does for someone's mental health when they're unmedicated. So that's what happened to me when I went in. What I watched happen to other people with disabilities was abhorrent. I mean, there were people there with physical disabilities that were getting no care. There was a woman who had a physical disability who couldn't shower herself. So they would take her over to the shower block once a fortnight to shower her, and they would pay a prisoner, like I think it was maybe like a packet of twisties or something, to shower this woman, like once a fortnight. It was horrible. There was another lady who was in the block of cells with me who was having TIAs, so mini strokes. This went on for a week with us buzzing up saying, she's having strokes, you need to come down. It took them a week before they got her there. So by the end of it, when I got moved, this woman was so so sick by the time they got her back from the hospital that she was in a walking frame using a sippy cup, like was so unwell after that because she was so affected after the amount of mini strokes that she had had. This is how they treat people in prison. There is no care for disabled people. There is, not only do they highly criminalise disabled people, when you get in there is no specialised care. Now, partly that's just because they don't care, but the other half is because there is no Medicare funded services in there. So the healthcare is substandard. So you can't, you just don't get access to good healthcare. You don't get access to see psychiatrists, psychologists, doctors, nurses, dentists, or anything that you need access to when you need it. I was given out-of-date medication the whole time I was there. They come in little, your meds come in these little sachets. And I was collecting the empty sachets as like some warped, weird evidence. I decided I'd keep of like out-of-date meds. I don't know why. Anyway, when they raided the room, they took them all because you're not allowed to keep evidence. But, you know, out-of-date meds, another thing. Now, I used to work for health, so I know that like there's some issues in giving people out-of-date meds. But this is how they treat people. This is how it is. So not only do you not have access to Medicare funded services, which means you don't have access to things like mental health care plans, so you don't have access to those sort of services. You just don't have access to good quality services. But what it also means is because there's this sort of funding tension between the state and the Commonwealth, because prisons are state funded, and we don't get the Medicare funding, is that they can't attract staff to those prisons. So the prison that I was in, they employ doctors, but they employ them as salaried medical officers. So they have real difficulty in attracting doctors to that because they're not able to pay them as sort of as GPs. They pay them as salaried medical officers, and people just don't want to come and work for that. So they just get these sort of rotating doctors through these, you know, there was never the same doctor anytime you got up to see them when you could get to see them, because it would just be hell to try and see a doctor. So yeah, Helena, it's a nightmare in there. It's an absolute nightmare. Women would provide care to each other. Yeah, I think some of the most beautiful things I saw were women trying to heal each other. And obviously how effective that is I don't know, but I think that was some of the most beautiful things I saw, was the way that people would try to heal each other, but and care for each other, some of that caretaking, but it's limited because there's lockdowns. So, you know, this idea of helping people shower or helping people make beds or helping people to dress is limited because you're locked down. So at the time that you might, so I'm thinking particularly about the person who was unable to shower, we couldn't assist her to shower because the time you had to shower and be up and dressed for count was during the time of lockdown, and you had to present showered and dressed by the time you were unlocked. So we couldn't even help this person shower. So yeah, the system's just not constructed in any way to support people. When I left Adelaide Women's, they just installed a room, one cell that was slightly larger. It was supposed to be able to be wheelchair accessible, but I honestly don't know how that was going to work and how that person, if there was anyone in there with a wheelchair, how they were going to function. But that was about as close as they got to accessibility. But yeah, I'm not sure. But it's shit. But and like I said, it's even worse. They're criminalising disabled people, so more disabled people are getting into prison. So it starts before you even get into prison.
Thanks.
Great question.
Yeah, thank you so much. And just a shout out to some comments in the chat around access to the NDIS in prison, and a comment from Deb and sisters who are working on that very issue. So yeah, here's hope we can see some change on that too. Thank you so much. I'm conscious that it has ticked just over 7:30, And so we probably should wind this up, let Tabitha get on with her evening, let you all get into your dinners. Enjoy. I hope yours is already, Tess. But I want to thank firstly Tabitha for such a incredible talk tonight, and for such generosity in answering all of these questions and engaging with the discussion tonight. The talk, as always, was such an important and wonderful call to action. As Tabitha said in the talk, abolition is a verb, requires action, it requires doing. And so I think this was such a wonderful invitation to get into that work, as I know many people on this call are already doing. So thanks again, Tab, for joining us tonight and taking the time and taking the time so generously with us all.
Thanks so much, Tab. It was such a pleasure. And thanks to all of our audience for joining too. It felt like such a intimate crowd, which made it all the more special.
Just a quick shout out to say that we did live stream this tonight, so it will be up on YouTube. So please feel free to share it around if you'd like to. And thank you to all of you for coming, listening, asking the wonderful questions that you asked.
Thanks so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you. Have a great evening.